Hidden behind a charming smile is the terrifying beast that first deceives its prey and then brings their lives to a tragic end. Rodney Alcala's killing style was far more brutal and unbelievable than ordinary killers. He would sexually assault his victims, then take their lives by stabbing them with a hammer or other deadly weapon. It doesn't end here. After his appeasement, he would leave the bodies naked and pose in strange ways, as if they were horrifying images created by a sick mind. Behind every move of his, there was a psychological satisfaction, a sense of control and powerlessness of your victim. This is the story of a murderer whose crimes were not just murder, but also a brutal attempt to violate human dignity. Come on, this beast's scary journey. Mask who evaded the law for many years and took the lives of innocents. Are you ready to know how this enemy of humanity was stopped? If you are on the channel for the first time before starting the video, subscribe to True Crime Tales. You have got true crime stories on this channel. Now let's move on to the video. Rodney James Alcala was born on August 23, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas. Hailing from a middle-class family, the boy's early life was apparently normal, but in the 1950s, his father left the family. This incident left a deep impact on Rodney's personality. He joined the U.S. Army in 1961 at the age of 17. But soon the signs of his strange behavior and mental stress appeared. Experts described him as suffering from antisocial personality disorder. He was discharged from the Army in 1964. After leaving the Army, Rodney studied arts at the University of California, Los Angeles. He went on to work as a photographer, and his charm and intelligence impressed many. But no one knew what secrets were hidden behind the pictures. In 1968, Rodney Alcala's first known crime came to light. When Rodney sexually assaulted 8-year-old Tali Shapiro and tried to kill her, Tali Shapiro was only 8 years old. She was going to school. Rodney persuaded her to sit in his car. He was kidnapped and taken to his apartment. A passerby noticed a suspicious movement. The car had no number plate. He immediately followed her car and called the police. When the police arrived at Rodney's apartment, so Tali was found in a semi-dead state. Tali was sexually assaulted and almost killed it. The police soon rushed him to the hospital. Tali stayed in the community for 1 month. However, she was saved after medical treatment. But after the accident, his family had left the country. Rodney fled, but police collected blood-stained clothing and other evidence from the apartment. After raping and nearly killing Tali Shapiro, Rodney Alcala fled to New York. He enrolled in New York University Film School. None of his fellow students suspected that their popular classmate was living a double life, which itself is like a horror movie. 3 years after his attack on Tali Shapiro, Alcala's dark side emerged once again. In 1971, another horrific event took place in New York. A flight attendant, Cornelia Crilly, was found dead in her apartment. Cornelia was a beautiful young flight attendant who lived in her apartment in Manhattan, New York. Rodney finds Cornelia alone in the apartment, attacked him. Cornelia Curley spent her entire day at home. When Borstein came home from work, he was surprised to find his door locked, and no one answered the phone. When her boyfriend tried to reach her and failed, so he informed the police. The police came. It was a scary scene. The police broke down the door. Inside, Cornelia is found dead, naked, and there was a tooth mark on his breast. Rodney abused Cornelia. After she was raped, she was strangled to death, with something in her mouth so that she could not scream. After the murder, he arranges Cornelia's body in a special way to make it look more gruesome and confuse the police. The police found signs of violence from the apartment, blood stains, and the killer's samples of hair were found. There were rope marks on the victim's throat, indicating that the murder was committed by strangulation. Samples of the killer's hair were found in the apartment, but DNA testing was not available at the time. Fingerprints and teeth marks were also collected, but the killer could not be identified. Police concluded that the killer was physically strong and intelligent, as he had tried to erase evidence. New York police began questioning the suspects, but no clear leads were found. Neighbors said they didn't see any strangers entering the building. No witnesses saw Rodney at the time of Cornelia's murder, so police had no leads at the time. But the manner of the incident convinced the police that the killer could be a serial killer who was mentally ill and extremely dangerous. Police had limited evidence in Cornelia's case, and Rodney was not yet a suspect. Because of the lack of DNA technology, the killer could not be identified. Several years later, when Rodney was arrested in other cases, DNA evidence confirmed his involvement in Cornelia's murder. After the murder, he changed his name to John Berger and moved to New Hampshire. She got a job as a counselor at a girls' arts and drama camp. There, it made a lasting impact on campers. Two girls went to their local post office and saw a picture of Rodney Alcala on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list. And they looked up and said, "Oh my gosh, this is Mr. Berger." They reported to Dan. He calls the authorities. They arrest him. They take him into custody. California police received a call from the FBI saying, "We've arrested your man. You come and get it." California police presented Rodney in court, charging him with the brutal assault of Tali Shapiro, but his family had left the country. And Tali's family did not testify, and he stayed out of the case. Without a witness, the prosecution had no other choice. Rodney was sentenced to 3 years, and the parole board let him go after 34 months despite doing so badly to Tali Shapiro. So less than 3 years later, Rodney Alcala was a free man again. Rodney Alcala was employed by the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter. He also took pictures at weddings. What was surprising was that he was a registered sex offender during this time, but no one bothered to check his background. The situation became even more terrible when in 1978 she was chosen as a candidate in the popular TV show The Dating Game, which was considered the Bachelor of that era. But what no one knew was that Rodney Alcala had become a dangerous serial killer by then. In appearance, Rodney Alcala appeared to be a handsome, charming, and intelligent young man, someone who apparently wouldn't even harm a fly. But the reality was quite the opposite. Interestingly, the woman who got a chance to win a date with him on the show later dropped her intention. She said she finds Rodney scary. Perhaps his intuition saved his life, but not everyone else proved to be so lucky. In the meantime, Rodney Alcala had been released from prison and moved to New York, much to the consternation of the New York police, as they were already dealing with the crimes of another famous serial killer, the son of Sam, who was terrorizing the city. By this time in New York, 6 years had passed since the Cornelia Creeley case and no suspect had emerged. But when Rodney Alcala arrived in New York, within a week a new wave of crime swept the city. His next victim, Ellen Hoover, a 23-year-old musician and artist who belonged to a prominent show business family. Ellen's father owned the popular Hollywood nightclub Kairos, and his godfathers were big names like Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. The fame of Ellen's family immediately made the news of his disappearance front page, and the New York Police Department, NYPD, continued to search for him. Detective Steve Brasini worked very hard on this case. They received innumerable calls and chased every possible clue. Finally, an important clue was found from Ellen's apartment. Ellen had a date marked on her calendar, which said she was going to meet a man named John Berger. What was surprising was that it was the same name that serial killer Alcala was using as an alias, but the connection hadn't emerged at the time. A year later, Ellen's body was found near the grounds of Phelps Memorial Hospital in Westchester. The body had deteriorated to such an extent that the police had to resort to dental records to identify it. According to the post-mortem report, it was a murder. Police suspected that a man who was last seen with Ellen could be involved in the murder. He was a black man. The name John Berger on Ellen's calendar was pointing in that direction. DNA tests in 2010 clearly proved that Rodney Alcala was responsible for the murder of Ellen Hoover. Meanwhile, Alcala had left New York for California. He was in a constant hunting mode, an attitude that shows the mental state of serial killers. His crimes were not only heinous, however, it also complicated the investigation. Georgia Wicked, another innocent victim of Rodney Alcala, which he killed with great cruelty. His case highlights the dangerous mindset of Rodney and key aspects of the police investigation. Name: Georgia Wicked. Age: 27. The professional. Nurse living in Malabo, California. Georgia was a cheerful and independent woman who was on her way to a bright and successful future in her life. Rodney Alcala not only sexually assaulted Georgia Wicked, but also brutally murdered her. Georgia's throat was strangled with a cloth, which was considered the reason for the murder. Georgia's body bore signs of torture, including hammer blows to the head. It reflects the savage nature of Rodney that he used every possible means to torment his victim. Fingerprints and other evidence were collected from the Georgia apartment. There was no clear evidence of Rodney Alcala's presence at the murder scene, but his modus operandi raised suspicions. Turned towards them. Police compared the manner of Georgia's murder to other Rodney cases. Torture, sexual assault, and strangulation were common methods of Rouhani's crime, which were also present in the case. After Rodney's arrest, he also confessed to Georgia's murder. He admitted that he met with Georgia on the pretext of his photography and killed him. The Georgia case provided further evidence against Rodney, which led to his trial. I have been helpful. Another victim of Rodney, Charlotte Lamb, an independent and confident woman, was busy with the routine of her life. But in June 1978, she suddenly disappeared. One hot evening in June 1978, Charlotte Lamb walked out of her house, but was never seen alive again. The last clue, she was seen leaving with an unknown man, who introduced himself as a professional photographer. Who was the unknown man? It was a mystery to the police. Charlotte's family and friends were upset when she didn't return and immediately approached the police. 24 hours later, a body was found by a cleaner in the laundry room of a building. The body was in a decomposed state. The killer had left the body in a strange manner, which seemed like he wanted to demonstrate his cruelty. The police were quick to confirm his identity. It was Charlotte Lamb who disappeared the day before. The police examined Charlotte's body, and the evidence told a chilling story. The killer first raped Charlotte, and then the telephone wire was used to strangle. There were injury marks on his body, which were proof of the killer's pain. The killer had deliberately placed the body in a certain order, which showed that he was doing it for his own psychological satisfaction rather than to hide the crime. The murder of Charlotte Lamb further confused the police. Fingerprints and hair samples were collected from the scene. Footprints of the killer were also found. Some residents said a strange male was seen around the building. A vague sketch was made with the help of witnesses, but it was difficult to identify the killer. Police compared the case to previous murder cases and found some eerie similarities. Encourage women to take pictures. Rape and murder. Leaving the body in a strange position, which revealed Rodney's state of mind. The police found out that the murder was not of an ordinary criminal, but the work of a serial killer. Charlotte's murder was similar to Rodney Alcala's other cases, but the evidence was insufficient. When Rodney was arrested and his storage unit was searched, Charlotte's picture and jewelry were found there. In 2010, when DNA testing became possible, it was clearly proven that Rodney Alcala was the one responsible for Charlotte's murder. Rodney Alcala is still one of the world's most feared serial killers. More than 130 victims and countless stories. But today we have told you the story of a few victims. And now we'll talk after the murder of his last victim. The brutal criminal was finally arrested. Rodney Alcala's last victim was 12-year-old Robin Samsu, an innocent child playing with her friend Bridget in Huntington Beach, California. This day, June 20th, 1979, proved to be the last day of Robin's life. Alcala, who often attracted women and girls as a photographer, offered to take pictures to attract Robin and his friend Bridget. Robin's friend Bridget grew suspicious of the man, and the man refused to take the picture and retreated, and Rodney decided to leave. He kept quiet and looked at Robin, and when Robin and his friend left for home, on the way, Rodney finds Robin alone and kidnaps him. After Robin went missing, his mother immediately informed the police. Witnesses had seen a suspicious man with Robin and were given a description. The search for the killer had intensified and pressure was mounting. The details provided by Bridget resulted in a comprehensive blueprint, which was provided to the media throughout Southern California.
This sketch proved important in the identification of Rodney Alcala. Alcala's parole officer saw the sketch and immediately contacted detectives. He said, "Look, one person was included in my caseload. You really need to see it. His name is Rodney Alcala. It's been 11 years since Rodney Alcala left 8-year-old Tali Shapiro for dead. But this time it wasn't hard to find. He was living with his mother in Monterey Park, which was near those mountains, where Robin Sams's remains were found. The foundation of suspicion on Rodney Alcala had been strengthened. He was a perfect suspect in every sense. On July 24, 1979, police arrested Alcala and charged him with the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Robin Samsu. The police investigation took an unexpected turn when Alcala's sister came to visit him in prison. The conversation was recorded. During the meeting, Alcala said to his sister, "Do me a favor, get the stuff out of my storage locker in Seattle, Washington, and clean it up." What Alcala didn't know was that police had already found a receipt for a storage locker during a search of his home. After learning about this locker, the police decided to search for him. The receipt was a clue that Alcala had moved his belongings into the locker 9 days after Robin Sams's body was discovered. Police found dozens of photographs of girls and women, most of whom were underage. The images were of potential victims, whom Alcala had attracted as a photographer. Several of these women and girls were later found missing or dead, linked to Alcala's crimes. During the search, the police found a silk bag, which was filled with jewelry. The jewels belonged to various victims, which Alcala kept as a trophy. This included Robin Samso's gold earrings, which were later identified by Robin's mother. Some notes and personal items were found, which contained information regarding the places and victims that Alcala had targeted. The first case in 1980. Alcala was sentenced to death, but the sentence was overturned due to some legal technical flaws in the case, and the case was retried. The second trial in 1986. He was again sentenced to death in the new case. But again, due to legal problems, it was annulled and another trial was started. Third edition, 2010. This time with the help of technology and DNA evidence. Alcala was found guilty of murdering 4 more women along with Robin Samsu. These women's: Georgia Wixted, 27 years old; Charlotte Lamb, 31 years old; Barkley, 18 years old; Jill Parento, 21 years, were included. In this case, Alcala was once again sentenced to death. Alcala confessed to the murders of 2 more women in New York, namely Cornelia Curley, 23 years old; Alan Hoover, 23 years old. The number of victims. Police estimate the number of Rodney Alcala's victims could be as high as 130, as he was found in possession of dozens of images of women and children, many of whom have not been identified to date. Alcala spent the rest of his life in San Quentin Prison, California, where he remained as a death row inmate. During this time, she did her own advocacy and even wrote poetry. In prison, he tried several times to prove his innocence, but without success. As of July 2021, Rodney Alcala died of medical reasons. He suffered from a number of ailments in prison, including cancer and other chronic ailments. He died in prison before his sentence was carried out. Rodney Alcala's story is that of a killer who, behind his cunning and false smile, was a terrifying beast. His life is a lesson that it is necessary to bring such criminals to book at the